Hi, and welcome to my podcast. I'm Sandy Laws, and this is Jeremiah. Jeremiah is my co host and producer. Jeremiah, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. I can't wait to get into this episode 2 of the Easter journey with you.
This particular podcast goes into a very familiar story, and so I think we're hoping to shed some new light on it, or bring at least our thinking to it, right? Like I
Absolutely.
know we both acknowledge that we don't have all the answers because these stories they're big theological complex stories, but we do have some insight. And remember, we're just trying to follow Jesus from when he raised Lazarus from the dead to this point where he is now coming into Jerusalem. And of course, everybody knows the story because this is the Easter story, right? The triumphal entry. What do you remember
hmm
about that when you were growing up?
Um, Palm Sunday, I always
Yeah.
remember the little kids, whether I was one of them or witnessing them raise their, wave their palm branches around. And then,
Yeah.
depending on how elaborate the church was, right, you might actually see a donkey, or you might they might dial it up a lot, but I do remember the idea of the parade and the flannel graphs of it too when I was a kid.
What is
Yeah.
that? What's a flannel
Flannel graphs
graph?
are they're like flannel, and they're the cutouts, painting, drawings, whatever, of the characters, and you put them up and they stick, right? So you're like, well, here's Jesus and here's his
Oh,
donkey, and it's
okay.
like
Th-
that's
This
a
is something you
flannel
played
graph is the
with.
name.
Okay.
No, it's like the Sunday school teacher would be like,
The Sunday school
telling you the
teacher.
story and sticking all this stuff up there. And like,
Okay.
here's little a figure of Jesus, and here's the people waving and the triumphal entry, right? Or you remember the story of him sending, was it which, I don't remember which disciple, but hey, go get me the donkey, and they bring him
Go give me the
back. And
donkey, right?
yeah.
Well, glad that you remember that, but did you take anything away from it at the time that connected you with Jesus? Just curious.
Connect with Jesus. No, the biggest thing I remember once I got old enough is I could never wrap my mind around how you'd go from this celebratory thing to
Yeah.
executing them in such a short period of time. As I've gotten older, that makes more sense to me. Just all the dynamics and powers that were going on here. Um, but yeah, you've envisioned one person be saying, "Here's our King, here's our Savior, whatever," and the next week, "Crucify him, crucify him." That's it. That's
Yeah.
wild.
I totally agree with that sentiment. Like, I was confused. Like, well, why were they so happy and celebrating him? And then why did they let that happen? Kind
Now,
of
when you first
picturing.
encountered this story, were you more of an adult or were you a kid?
Oh, I'm sure I was a kid because
Okay.
I went to Catholic church, and
hmm
it was big. But I had the same sentiment. That's interesting as you did. Like, how could they go from "We're so glad you're here and you're the Messiah"? Like, how did those people react when Jesus was then sentenced to death? It's a weird dynamic to go from this picture of excitement to have him there to descending into this horrible place where he's sentenced to death and he's completely innocent. And I think, as we've talked about, this part of Jesus's life is like it's chaos. It's like a symphony with those hard chords in it, the cacophony of sound in a symphony where it's grating on us. Like there's a lot of things that are confusing, and we don't necessarily put all the pieces together to understand it. And even Jesus had a lot of emotion around it. But it's the hard part of his life story, if you will, because he's 100% in the hands of his enemies, as this is as it's unfolding, which is not a good place to be.
No, I mean, I think that I love that analogy you just gave of like the symphony where everything, um, there's a lot of dissonance all of a sudden. There's a lot of uncomfort happening, and that always happens before the in crescendo, right? Maybe not always, but
Yeah.
we know that feeling. We know that suspense that's starting to build, and this is that, right? Like, these pieces don't fit together Like if you were crafting a written story of the characters and their character arcs, it wouldn't unfold this way. But this, I think, shows the humanity in all sides of it, shows the fever pitch of the crowds, shows the culture of how probably
Mhm.
my understanding is how desperate they were to restore things to the way that it was and the way that they felt it should be, to be an autonomous state, to have their own rulers, to have the temple the way they envisioned it, and to see this guy that's going to do that. And then all of a sudden, very quickly, they decided this wasn't the guy that was going to do that. In fact, he might destroy that dream. Yeah, that starts to make more sense to me. I mean, think of any fandom we have now, right? Let's say a Super Bowl team, right? They go win, we're the best team, or they go play in the game, the best team ever, and they lose. Oh, fire the coach, get rid of everybody. And now this is a very generic example that obviously the Jesus story is very different than that. But you see how when people really want something and passions and hopes and dreams of not only yourself, but your entire family, it's emotional and it's not logical. And you see Jesus in the middle of the storm.
That's true. There's various sides in the storm. To use your football analogy, there's two sides for sure, and that's the side of Jesus and his followers, and then there's the side of the religious authorities and what they want to have happen. And I guess the third side is the Roman government, and perhaps they're part of the crowd or whatever. I
Mm-hmm.
just think it's definitely a game of with a serious outcome of matching wits and who is going to get what and how are they going to get it. It takes maneuvering on the part of the high priest and the religious authorities to actually get Jesus to where he's crucified. But the Romans are complicit because they did it without having evidence that Jesus was guilty. But in the beginning, we have this beautiful scenery of Jesus coming down from a hill, from the very top of the Mount of Olives, right? Which is a ridge outside of Jerusalem. And you would come down this road, which a lot of pilgrims travel down right now, or when they go to Israel. You would come down this hill. So you're starting at a high point again when we talk about the highs and lows. And you would descend into the Kidron Valley. And off across from the walls of the temple, across the Kidron Valley, is the Garden of Gethsemane. So Jesus would come from Bethany through Bethpage, where he got the donkey, to the top of the Mount of Olives, and then descend down there, and then ascend to the walls to get into the temple. And he would come through a specific gate called the Golden Gate, which is a gate that's walled off now for interesting religious reasons. And we won't go into that. But as Jesus is descending from the top of the Mount of Olives, he stops and he looks over Jerusalem and he considers everything he sees in front of him. And he knows this is the last time he'll see it from this view. And he cries, he weeps. He cries over Jerusalem. It's a touching moment, right? We just talked about how he cried about Lazarus, and now he's crying over Jerusalem. And why do you think he's crying as he's preparing to go into that city?
I mean, a lot of ideas come to my mind. One being of what the city should be and how far it's going to be from that. I mean, I think he probably can see the temple is going to be destroyed. I think he knows what's going to happen to him there. These people that he cares for, I think he knows how they're going to turn on him.
Yeah.
Which is, and also I just think reading all this part of the story, he's clearly just in a raw emotional state. I mean, the Lazarus story before this, um, you can tell he's got a lot of weight on him. You know, even at one moment he says, "My soul is in turmoil." I think we see that this weeping, these pauses are evidence that his soul is in turmoil.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's turmoil there. there's also sadness that the people who he loves could have exactly what they want, right? So let's say what
Mm-hmm.
they want is a stable government, so to speak, and the right to be an autonomous state. Jesus would give them peace and love and kindness in their community. He would create a community, the perfect community, if only they would let him. But they get in their own way, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Jewish people and the Gentiles get in their own way, and they're vying over power, so they'll never have peace. And he says that you'll never have peace, which is very true even today. It's very true even today, because peace is not some big open thing that we hope for it, but we really don't know what it looks like. The only peace that we can achieve is personally is peace with God. And that brings us peace. That's really what he's trying to say. And so he's crying over the fact that he tried. Like, he really tried to bring them to understand him and to follow him. But he certainly recognized that some of them would not, no matter what. And as you said, he's crying because he knows that not one stone would be left upon another, because in 70 AD, the entire temple is destroyed. So it's a sad moment. And as a person, you could see that he's looking at this beautiful city. He spent time there. His father's house is there. This is the center of the Jewish life, a life that he participated in. How many times had he been there as a kid and as an adult? And now this is the last time he's going to enter it. It's just, I'm sure he felt sad for many different reasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, as I said, he goes back up the hill on the other side of the Kidron Valley, and he goes, and the temple's right there. And he goes into the courtyard. And what's happening in those outer courtyards there when Jesus arrives? I mean, who's there in the courtyard? Yeah. Oh, it's the merchants. So he goes there and he cleanses the temple, right? That's what we're talking about. He seems like he's in a rage, to your point that he seemed like he's in turmoil. And this is kind of a reflection of that, because he goes in and he sees all this commerce taking place in the courtyards outside the temple, and it enrages him because they're turning his father's home into a marketplace, which he was not in agreement with 100%. He did not like that. And one of the reasons he didn't like it, that's probably worth touching on, is that because they had their stalls and stuff in the outer courtyards, it kind of prevented any Gentiles, non-Jews, from going to that courtyard and perhaps encountering God there.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Because there was you had to be fully Jewish to go in the outer courtyard, inner courtyard, and then you actually have the temple, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so the outer courtyard, so Gentiles could go to.
Yes.
Okay, so their retail space was occupying space that other people should be able to be in.
Occupying a valuable spiritual space. And by the way, the reason why that happened is that the Sadducees that used to be that these markets were across the Kidron Valley. So if you wanted to go get your money changed or pick up a sheep on your way to the temple for sacrificing, you would do it there. But the Sadducees decided that, let's have it right on the temple properties because it was more convenient. Also, probably more commerce happened when it was right there. So
and they may have owned some of these shops and some of that, right?
Yeah, maybe. But, that to me was kind of a big decision to move something like this big commerce operation off-site to on-site onto the temple. I mean, the message
now, Jesus,
is this space
he'd seen this before.
That we're going to occupy,
why do you feel like he got
valuable.
So mad at this
It's
moment?
so valuable. We can't let those, the common folk use it when we can use it to make money.
So Jesus had seen this before, right? Why do you think he chose this moment, or maybe not chose, but why do you think this moment made him so mad? Because he grew up with his whole life, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that he's just very angry because he's he's just angry at the control the religious leaders have and the direction that they're going with what was originally God's plan for his people. Like he sees the distinction between what God had in mind and what has actually came to fruition because of, people.
Okay.
And he goes there. It is his father's house. It was built for God. And
Right.
he's just torqued off. It's like, what if you had a retail operation in your front yard? It would feel wrong and disrespectful, and it would make you mad. So we could see why he would be mad about it. But it's clearly a sign that he is not for what is happening. He's against what is happening there. And it's another red flag to the religious authorities, right? Like, hey, it's, he's getting a lot of attention. People are flocking to him. He has this tremendous welcome as he comes into Jerusalem. A lot of people are really liking him and following him. And then he comes in and he sends this really strong message of, I don't like the way you're running the place.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
how
definitely
do you think
another
they would?
shot
Yeah.
across the bow to provoke, or it's going to provoke them to action.
Yeah, it kind of solidifies their thought process if they had any doubt that we have to get rid of this guy because look at what he's doing. He's
Mm-hmm.
interrupting our business as usual. He's coming to the temple courtyards, which he was, and preaching and teaching a completely different message than they were teaching, and people were
And getting a
enthralled by
huge
him.
response for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess if we put ourselves in the same boat again as those religious leaders, it's very much a competitive situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anybody that's found themselves in any situation where you care about something, you've built something to be the way you want it, and somebody is moving your cheese, so to speak, you're going to respond viscerally to it more often than not.
Yeah. Yeah. But he's unafraid of them. Uh, he knows that he's not going to escape their plan. In fact, of course, we would argue that he knew all about their plan. And in
Right.
fact, he was engineering it all to happen in a certain way so that his plan, the big plan of Jesus coming for redemption, would actually come to fruition. And this is what has to happen. So these sort of difficult moments between when he starts at the top of the Mount of Olives and when he ends on the cross just kind of add to the narrative that there's conflict and it's happening and everybody's kind of mad about it, including Jesus. Mm-hmm. So, we are now like walking through the week of his actual crucifixion, and a bunch of stuff happens from Palm Sunday through the actual crucifixion and resurrection. And there's varying stories about where he is and what he's doing. Is he when he takes a day of rest? Like, is he going out? I think he's going out to Bethany in the evenings until Thursday night, staying with his friends, coming back and forth. But when he's coming into town, there's various events that happen. He's teaching, he's preaching, he's healing people right there in the vicinity of the temple. But one of the most intriguing stories, and I think a story that you very much love, is the story in Matthew 21 where he does something with a fig tree, the tree story.
Yeah, the most bizarre. When I look at the body of work, I feel like I can see a consistent character of Jesus. And this one, from the way I interpret things, I have a hard time understanding how it fits in because there's just this fig tree just minding its own business. He wants some fruit from it. There is none, and he kills the thing. And all these stories, we know all these stories are in here for a purpose, right? To teach us something.
Yeah.
Is this to give us groundwork for a parable? A very disingenuous or hard reading of this would be, man, if we're not giving fruit, we might get struck down. That would be a very, I'm not saying that's what this is, but I'm just trying to, map out the terrain here. Two, is this just showing Jesus's raw emotional state of this? Is it just do you think that he has that kind of power? We know he has that kind of power, but he's never demonstrated it in that fashion before, out of frustration. Because he didn't, when he went into the temple to cleanse it, he didn't bring about miraculous power. He was just a guy mad, right? As to where this story, he brings about miraculous power because this, like when he walked up to it, there was not going to be any fruit on this vine. Like what is he doing here?
There should have been, there could have been, based on the time of the year, the season, there could have been fruit on the tree. So that's all I wanted to say. Keep going.
No, so I guess that's the thing. This story is really hard for me to understand. I'm not criticizing the story. I'm just like, when I look at the body of work of, here's this guy that weeps with his friends and encounters everybody where they're at and is protective and seems to redeem and restore things. Now, obviously it's a fig tree. So this is a very small piece. So it's not really a big deal, but it's just bizarre to me that he reacted that way again inside the other body of work. And it's in scripture. The story's supposed to teach me something. So either my framework is off or, there's something about that I just don't understand. It seems really harsh and really bizarre because the character that I would say is, here's a fig tree that didn't produce fruit and he touches it and it starts producing fruit. That seems in the character that I understood from the rest of this body of work. Right. And instead it's just gone and he's angry. Like he seems how many times is he really angry? He gets frustrated a lot, but how many times is he really angry at the temple? Yeah. And this, right?
Yeah, I think he shows incidents of anger and frustration at other times, but I think to your point, this feels a little out of character for him. Like he's coming into the city after being in Bethany, walks by the tree. He's hungry. There's no fruit on the tree. There maybe should be, but he's looking at this tree and he's saying it's producing no fruit. And that enrages him. So it just can't be a tree that he's mad at, right? Like we probably agree on that. Mm-hmm. Like, because he could have zapped a lot of things along the way that weren't totally producing what he wanted.
But until this moment, we didn't realize that he even could manifest his power that way. So that sounds a little sci-fi, but you know what I'm saying.
No, because he did have control over nature. So if we agree absolutely. With that,
but we haven't seen him do it that way.
Right, mm-hmm. We haven't. No, you're right about that. It's outside of the love and caring narrative. But that means really that the tree is something else. It's just a symbol, right?
Mm-hmm. And I don't want anybody to hear that I'm doubting the narrative that we believe. I'm not. It's just the story. I take onus that there's something about the story that I'm not understanding of this, because also what happens is, okay, let's say it's a metaphor. It's just an example, it's a teaching tool. It's a real-time parable. But then you combine that with just all the weird manifestations of Christianity, fire and brimstone kind of thought. It seems like it fuels that weird fire a lot that also does not seem to agree with Jesus's biggest message, right? So I don't know. I don't know. It's a weird one.
It is hard, but I agree with you. It's out of character. It doesn't seem like something that he would do. It doesn't seem like he would really have a problem finding something to eat.
He could. We know he has the power to just make that fig tree or find another fig tree and feed the whole city with it. Like we
Right.
know he can do it.
So it's a symbol of Israel. It's a symbol of
Hmm.
Israel's inability to believe in him.
Hmm.
And so if the fig tree, which is a tree that bears fruit for a lot of people, if it's not bearing fruit, if it's not doing what it should be doing, and in this case, the Jewish people believing in him and finding his message to be true, then it's being judged, if you will. He's cursing it as a substitute for cursing the Jewish people who didn't believe in him, uh, or as a message that he's cursing them, or
Hmm.
as um, a show of the fact that he could cause something like that to happen. I
Yeah,
mean, it's not like he hasn't. Yeah. Go ahead.
that feels like it could, because later on in the story, I think how we're going to close it. My favorite part of the story, he kind of communicates the complete opposite of that, right?
Yeah.
And and yeah, I guess, and this story is probably a great example of why we're doing what we're doing here,
Yeah.
of getting people to sit down and talk about these stories
Right.
and come again. I'm not trying to write some scholarly viewpoint of this is what it is.
No.
I think, but
Well.
if
Yeah.
we come together and we talk about these things and we tease these things out, I think we're going to, how do I want to say this, encounter Jesus in a way
Yeah.
we hadn't before. I think we're
Sure.
going to create better communities amongst ourselves by doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So this story, I think, is a great one. Like, you and I don't have the super clear answer about this, but we can talk about it.
No.
And I think with it, we can enrich our faith by this.
I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it. We'll just leave that there. The fig tree, which is no longer alive, and we're going to move over to John to in our timeline. What happens next? John 12, starting in verse 20. This story is very interesting because this is the story where we hear Jesus say distinctly, "My time has come." Like all through his teaching and through the Gospels, he's always saying, "My time is not here yet." And this is the
Mm-hmm.
event where he says, "This is my time." So he knows from this moment forward, he probably already knows it, but he's maybe articulating it that now it's my
Mm-hmm.
time has come. And it has to do with the fact that some Greeks wanted to come to visit him, and they reach out to Philip and they say, "Hey, we want to visit with Jesus. Can you help arrange that?" Which they do. And when Jesus sees the Greeks, he realizes something pretty significant, um, which is that his message has gone viral, if you will, has gone beyond the borders of the Holy Land into other countries, into other empires, and that's valuable information, valuable moment in his life.
I mean, reaffirming is probably what I took from that. It's like, it's
Yeah,
working. Here's the evidence that what I've been doing is working.
right.
And I think this, as it's funny, as you brought up John 12, man, it just made me happy after going. As a side note, after studying for this might be one of the best culminations, one of the best pieces. Like, if you're going to go read something, read John 12. It
Yeah.
is
Okay.
beautifully written.
It is.
It's a
We love.
culmination of everything. I think you see every piece of Jesus's personality in this thing. The story's there. I think I've just really loved going over this chapter again and again. So sorry for the side note, but just,
No,
gosh, I
I
really
love
love
it. I
this
mean, it
book
just
or
goes
this
to show you
chapter.
how you can really glean something new every time you read it. But in this story with the Greeks, Jesus says the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. And then he goes on to talk about those who love their life will lose it, while those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Um, Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. The Father will honor the one who serves me. So the whole analogy of the kernel falling on the ground and producing more wheat, that's clearly related to his own what's going to happen to him, that he will fall through crucifixion, and then that will cause an entire spreading and be resurrected. That will cause an entire spreading of his message of the gospel truth. Um, it's
Now, could you
interesting his
imagine being a person
response.
hearing this?
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, could you imagine being a person hearing this? Because they don't have the context of what's about to happen. They don't know, right?
No.
I mean, you must be like, wait, what are you saying? What does this mean? Like, what, I don't like, do I have to, you have to be so confused at this moment listening to him. And it's for us, right? The story is for
Yeah.
us so we can look back and be like, oh my gosh, he laid this all out. But one of those people there listening to this be like, wow, I don't understand anything you're saying right now.
Well, I do. I think his closest disciples understood that he spoke in parables a lot. The apostles, he spoke 30% of the
Mm-hmm.
time in the
Mm-hmm.
genre of a parable. So they probably had some sense of it as an
Mm-hmm.
agricultural parable, but they definitely didn't know how he was going to fall. Like, what does this mean? The falling, etc. But at this moment, when Jesus
And also just it's
realizes that,
happening a few days from now.
absolutely. And at this moment, when he realizes the Greeks are now interested in the gospel, which means it's spreading, he realizes his ministry is coming to an end, and he says, now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say?
Mm-hmm.
Father, save me from this hour. So once again, we see this troubled, this difficulty in him, the knowing what he has to do, but also loving the people that he loves and feeling agony about it. But still, he does what his father wants. And this is the third and last time that a voice from heaven comes to Jesus. God says to him, Jesus says, Father, glorify your name. And the voice comes from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. So we know that God is there right with him as he's processing everything that's going to happen. And he's sharing
Now
that
that there's
with the
my
people around
soul's in
him.
turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
There's a piece where it's my soul's in turmoil. Save me from this hour. But then he goes on to say something like, but this is the hour of why I'm here. Right.
Yeah, he says, my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. So he's
Which I love
acknowledging.
this so much. I think it shows us the fully man and fully God.
Oh yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Like
I can see
this is
that.
so wild to me because here's the human like save me from this. This sucks. Like I don't want to do this. But the divine side of but this is why I'm here. You see this. I mean, there's a few points in scripture where you see the mix of these things,
Yeah,
and this is the one where it's so clear to me that he is both, and he has faith in his father, but it's not just a deity of like this is what I got to do. Okay, let's get it done, right? Like
all right.
he
Yeah,
saved me from
you're
this hour, and then he moves back and forth. And I also think it's a great. It gives me a lot of freedom in my faith too, because how many times do I waver or move or get confused and then come back, and it's like, well, that's the way of this. That's how it happens. That's how it unfolds. So I that moment in the story is profound to me.
I can see why. I think about it like when I'm tormented about my faith walk, and I think, yeah, I'm doing it for the glory of God, which you do as a dedicated follower of Christ. It is to glorify God. And the response to that is, I am with you. God is saying, I am with you, even though you're tormented or you're in agony. So it is a beautiful sentiment. And it's the last time that we hear from God in Jesus's journey specifically. He, of course, talks to God when he's on the cross. He talks to his Father.
Where's the moment where, so the moment where the voice hollers out to the crowd, is that before this?
This is what is happening. That it's this moment. The voice is, yeah. And he says that the Father said that this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. Judgment on Satan. Because what happens when Jesus dies on the cross and is resurrected? It destroys Satan's power. So he goes on to talk about how, it's coming right around the corner. I am the light. We'll only have the light for so long. And then from there, the people are talking about him. There's belief and there's unbelief. There's a lot of discussion around it. And there's this time when it's mentioned in John that some of the leaders believed in him. So some of the Jewish leaders, who we all characterize as one group of people that's after Jesus, no, indeed, they believe in him. But they're afraid to say anything because of the Pharisees. They're afraid the Pharisees will rat think him out and then throw him out of their synagogues, and then they won't have a community.
Right.
Which, we think, well, that's a low threshold to cross. But in fact, for them, it was a very big threshold to lose their standing in their community by being thrown out of the synagogue. And that leads us to the part of the story that you really like, where Jesus discusses the subject of judgment here a little bit more. And he's talking about those people who don't believe in him. And what does he say about them here?
So are we at...
Yes, we're at 47.
47, yes. Okay, so if anyone hears my words, but does not keep them, I do not judge that person, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. Again, it's one of those moments where I think it's this fun blend of fully man, fully God. If he knows what these people are about to do to him, he understands that they're not believing. He understands all of this. And in that moment, as a human, he is saying, I do not judge you. I do not hold this against you. I'm going to go through this still for you, even as you're doing this to me. And I think that I'm not trying to make a theological statement here. I'm not trying to venture into those waters at all of what that means or doesn't mean in the case of salvation and all those things. We know that I believe in order for us to have salvation and redemption, Jesus had to go through this process so we could have a pathway to our maker, to God, to restore
I love that.
our species, right?
Yeah.
And at that moment, he's saying, no matter all this is happening, I'm going to allow for that pathway to exist. So after everything that's happened, raising Lazarus, all these conspiracy theories. I mean, think of any time that you and I have been a part of some work where you felt like there was a wall in front of you and you had to kind of push through that wall to get it done. It did not make you happy, right? And you were not responding. You were not responding this way. I have had walls in front of me where I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not responding this way, right? Of like all the, like, people are literally, he knows this. They're plotting ways to kill him, right? And even though they believe in him, their social circles are more important than his life. I mean, all of this stuff.
Their religious practice is more important than his life.
Which is everything, right? Because that's their social circle, that's their
Yes.
commerce, that
Mhm.
is their family structures and hierarchies are all built upon this foundation that should be pointing them to Christ. And it's
Right.
not, right?
Right.
And he's still like, I'm not going to judge you guys. That's cool. I mean, that's inspiring to me.
Well, it's inspiring because it is that message of don't judge. He doesn't judge.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only righteous judge, right? So when we judge, we often do it
Mm-hmm.
poorly. We don't have righteous judgment. We just have judgment. We're
Well, I
bad
think
at it.
all of us were horrible at all this, and all of us have a lot of, not a lot, different seasons. We have doubt, right? What
Yes.
is it about this faith? Am I crazy? Right? These people that think I'm crazy, are they right? What do I have wrong about this faith? Because I have a certain piece of Christendom that I believe, and other pieces of Christendom believe other things than me. And what does this all mean? And when you see stories like this, I think it crystallizes at least my faith of saying there's something special here for the central figure in this thing to say something like that. This, because most of the time the stories we're attracted to are the stories where the good guy, the hero, seeks justice and
Oh,
seeks revenge upon those that have done him or me wrong.
right.
Right? That is what we're drawn to as a species, and that's what we write. Like, look at all of our stories. Like, you would never see a book that stood hundreds of years on the shelves. You would never see a summer blockbuster where the hero has all these horrible things coming to him. It's like, it's cool. I don't judge you. You would never see that. And
Yeah.
it's affirming to me that there's something about this that is still captivates me and draws me to it.
I love that. I think that's a great way to think of Jesus in. It's an excellent way to close out our podcast today because that's such a high note and such a
Yeah, they're hard to
difficult
find in the
story.
story. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think you found a really awesome, true nugget of a high note here about his not judging us, but loving us even when he's being persecuted. So thanks for that. And next podcast, we'll be talking about the plot to kill Jesus. So back to a low note.
Right.
And then we'll walk through the Last Supper, which is definitely a high note.
Mm,
And I look forward to that discussion. So don't forget to
absolutely.
check out my website, sandylaws.com. There's lots of great information on there. And thank you, Jeremiah.
Thanks for having me.
It
As
was
always, Sandy.
awesome. Okay.
Absolutely.
Take care. Bye
Yep.
bye.
Bye bye.